My name's Luke, and at 23, I'm still figuring things out. I've spent the last few years drifting from one job to the next, never really staying in one place for too long. I guess I've always been searching for something, somewhere to belong, or at least something that makes sense. Right now, I'm working at a small record store in a neighborhood that feels a little too familiar, but in a way, it's just where I end up when I don't know where else to go. The work doesn't excite me, but it doesn't make me hate myself either. It's enough to cover rent and keep me from feeling entirely like a failure. On any given Friday, I don't look forward to going home, not when the silence feels like it's crushing me. So, instead of heading straight back, I find myself walking into a bar down the block. It's a low-key place, the kind where the music is always just loud enough to make conversation feel comfortable, and where the smell of bourbon and old wood always seems to be in the air. I slide onto a stool in the back, away from the crowd, and order a drink. The weight of the day lifts a little, but there's still something missing. That's when I saw him. He was sitting a few stools away, a man whose presence immediately caught my attention. Tall, easily over 6 feet, and solid, with broad shoulders that seemed to fill the space he was in. His dark skin glowed under the dim lights, and his calm, confident posture made it seem like the world was something he could just step into without needing to fight for his place. I caught his eyes for a second, then quickly looked away, not knowing why my pulse had started to race. He spoke before I could gather myself. First time here. His voice was deep, warm. It immediately put me at ease, even though my heart was still beating too fast. I turned, and before I could say anything, he smiled. His smile wasn't flashy, just easy, as though he had no reservations about the world around him. "Yeah," I said, trying to sound casual. "Just felt like getting out." His smile widened, and he nodded. "Makes sense," he said. "I'm Isaac." He extended a hand, and when I shook it, the warmth of his skin made me feel like I'd been touched by something real. "Luke," I said, my voice coming out steadier than I thought it would. We started talking, the conversation flowing effortlessly. Isaac told me he was 30, a personal trainer at a local gym, and a former athlete. His words came with the confidence of someone who was at peace with his place in life, but it wasn't arrogance, just a quiet self-assurance. He made everything sound so simple, like he had figured out the trick to being content with who you were. "What about you?" he asked. "What brings you here?" I hesitated, not sure how to answer. I was tired of explaining that I didn't know what I was doing, but something about Isaac's presence made me want to open up. "Not much to tell," I said. "Just trying to find my way." Isaac nodded, as though he understood exactly what I meant. "Yeah, everyone's on their own path. Sometimes it takes a little longer to figure things out." We continued to talk, and I found myself relaxing in his presence, drawn in by the way he listened, by the calm energy that seemed to radiate from him. When the bartender called last call, Isaac looked over at me. "Still feel like talking?" he asked. "I've got a place nearby." My heart skipped a beat, but I didn't hesitate. "Sure," I said. I wasn't sure what I was agreeing to, but I didn't care. There was something about him that made me feel like maybe I didn't need to think about it too much. Isaac stood up, and I followed him outside. The night air was cool, but it didn't matter. The walk to his place was brief, just a few blocks, but it felt like everything around us faded into the background. His stride was long and confident, and for the first time in a while, I felt like I wasn't the one having to keep up. His place wasn't far, a small apartment tucked above a gym. It was simple, just like him, but there was a warmth to it. The walls were lined with photos of athletes, and the faint smell of sweat and leather lingered in the air. "Make yourself at home," he said, tossing his keys onto the counter. "Want something to drink?" "Yeah, sure," I said. I was a little nervous now, not knowing what was going to happen next, but Isaac's steady presence calmed me, even as my pulse picked up again. He poured 2 glasses of whiskey, and we settled on the couch. The room was dim, the soft light from a nearby lamp casting a glow that made everything feel more intimate. I could feel the space between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. There was just something about being near Isaac that felt different. Isaac leaned back on the couch, stretching his legs out in front of him. His arm draped casually over the back of the couch, and his eyes met mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. "So, Luke," he said, his voice low, smooth, "what's really going on with you?" I hesitated. His gaze was so direct, it felt like he could see straight through me. I swallowed, unsure of how much to say. But there was a pull in his gaze, an unspoken invitation that made it hard to lie. "I don't know," I said, my voice quiet. "I feel like I'm stuck in between. You know? Like I'm trying to figure out who I am, but nothing feels right." Isaac was silent for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "I get that," he said finally, "but you don't have to figure it all out right now, you know? Take your time." There was something in his tone that made me believe he wasn't just talking about me. He was talking about himself too. He seemed like someone who had seen the struggles of being unsure, of feeling lost. And in that moment, I didn't feel quite so alone. We sat there for a while, talking about life, about what it meant to be uncertain. The conversation felt different, like we were both opening up in ways we hadn't expected. And as the night wore on, the air between us seemed to thicken. The more we talked, the more I realized I wasn't just talking to a stranger. I was talking to someone who understood. Isaac moved a little closer, and I could feel the heat of his body, the subtle way his presence seemed to surround me. "You don't have to hide, Luke," he said softly. "Not with me." His words hung in the air, heavy and vulnerable. I felt my heart race again, but this time it wasn't out of uncertainty. It was something else, something that made my chest tighten and my breath catch. "I don't know how to stop hiding," I admitted, my voice barely above a whisper. Isaac didn't say anything at first. He just moved closer, his hand brushing against mine in a gesture so simple, yet so loaded with meaning. It sent a shiver down my spine. "You don't have to figure it all out tonight," he said. "Just be here, right now." The words settled into me like a quiet promise. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I didn't have to carry everything on my own. His fingers brushed lightly against mine, and I felt the pull of his touch, the warmth of his hand. And in that moment, it felt like everything around us had fallen away, leaving only the two of us in the stillness. Isaac leaned in, his lips just a breath away from mine. "Does this feel right?" he whispered, his voice low, searching. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. I closed the distance between us, meeting his lips with a kiss that was tentative at first, gentle, questioning. But as our lips moved together, it deepened, turning into something more, something that felt real. When he pulled back, his forehead rested against mine. "You're shaking," he murmured, his hand moving to the back of my neck in a soothing touch. "It's okay," he whispered. "You're safe." I nodded, my breath coming in short, shallow bursts. There was something about Isaac that made me feel like I could trust him, something that made the chaos in my mind settle, even if just for a moment. The kiss hung in the air, suspended between us like a fragile thing, too delicate to break but still heavy with meaning. For a long moment, neither of us moved, and I could feel the electricity of the touch lingering on my lips. Isaac's hand was still at the back of my neck, and I felt the warmth of his touch sink into me, like it was stitching something back together inside, something I hadn't even realized was broken. "I've never done this before," I whispered, the words slipping out before I could stop them. It wasn't a confession I had expected to make, but there it was. I had never been with a man before. The thought of it had always been there, lurking in the back of my mind, but I'd never acted on it. And now, Sitting here with Isaac, it felt like the world was suddenly opening up in a way I couldn't explain. Isaac's fingers tightened around my neck, but his touch wasn't forceful. It was gentle, understanding. He didn't seem surprised, and in a way, that made it easier. It was like he had known all along. "You don't have to explain anything," Isaac said softly, his voice low and steady. "We move at our own pace. No pressure." I nodded, but the words didn't seem to help the confusion swirling in my chest. I had always been so careful about who I let close, always cautious about where I placed my trust. But with Isaac, there was something different. His presence wasn't demanding. It wasn't like he was trying to lead me somewhere. It was like he was letting me find my own way, and he was just here to walk with me, wherever that might be. Isaac's lips brushed my ear, his breath warm against my skin. "I'm not going anywhere," he whispered. "We don't have to rush. Just let things happen." His words made my pulse spike again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was something else, something raw, something that made my body tingle with anticipation. Isaac leaned back slightly, giving me space to breathe. His eyes never left mine, though, and I could see the curiosity in them. He wasn't pushing, wasn't trying to make me do anything. He was just waiting, allowing me to take the next step when I was ready. I felt like I was teetering on the edge of something, caught between the person I had always been and the person I might become. There had always been an unspoken barrier inside me, something that held me back, kept me in my place. But with Isaac, it felt like that barrier was softening, like it was okay to step beyond the lines I had drawn for myself. I leaned forward, this time with more intention. I could feel the heat rising in my chest, my body responding to his in a way that I couldn't ignore. Our lips met again, this time more firmly, and I felt a shiver run through me. Isaac's hand slid down my back, pulling me closer, and I could feel the steady beat of his heart against mine. It was a steady rhythm, calm and sure. It made me feel like I was part of something, like I wasn't just drifting anymore. I pulled away, my breath coming in short bursts. "I don't know what to do," I admitted, my voice shaking a little. It wasn't embarrassment, it was something else, something deeper. "I don't know what any of this means." Isaac looked at me for a long moment, his gaze steady but soft. "It means you're human," he said, his words simple but profound. "We all have to figure things out in our own time. No one has the answers right away. Just take it one step at a time. We're allowed to be unsure." His words hung in the air, settling into me like a balm for a wound I hadn't known was there. It was like he was giving me permission to be myself, to not have all the answers, to not know exactly what I was doing. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel so alone in my uncertainty.